So just as a brief introduction, you're Rusto. You're the owner of the Savages. You do management work as well for the Savages, right? You do
This is true.
recruiting stuff. You do all sorts of stuff for the Savages. What sort of basic day do you have with managing your team? What do you typically do?
Well, usually we practice every day, except for now we play open on the weekends.
Hmm.
So our practice days on those days are usually a lot shorter. But generally, I come home from my real human job, and we practice like 6 to 10 or 6 to 12 Eastern. So it's usually anywhere from a 4 to 6 hour day. And we do most of our stuff on Discord, as I think most Overwatch teams do.
Yeah, I think most teams do at this point.
Yeah, it's actually interesting. Like Overwatch is like the only game or esport that I've worked in that uses Discord this much.
Hmm.
But yeah, I manage the team. I founded the Savages back in March. We also have a Counter Strike team, and I actively just work as like the manager or the personnel director for the Overwatch team because Overwatch is kind of like my favorite esport.
Hmm.
So I work directly with the players every day. I handle all the scheduling, all the enrollment, recruitment, all that kind of stuff. We also have, two coaches,
Hmm.
Massive and Azaraki, two great coaches that handle a lot of the big brain stuff. But I just do the paperwork stuff.
Yeah, just the normal. So then, what? I guess tell me about the CS team. I had not heard about the CS team at all, actually.
Well, the Counter Strike side of things is a little different because I think the Counter Strike community is a lot bigger.
Hmm.
But for people that are familiar, like I don't know if you're familiar
I am not
with.
at all.
Okay, so in Counter Strike, you have like the main scene
Hmm.
revolves around like ESEA. Do you know what that is?
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah. So basically, ESEA is where there's like leagues and there's like tiered leagues, and when you watch like pro players, they're usually playing in Pro League, which is
Hmm.
like the top 10 teams or top 12 teams, and then below that is Premier, and below that is Main, and it's Intermediate, and then it's Open, which anybody can join.
Right.
Okay, and if you perform well in one tier and you like win in the playoffs, then you get invited to the next tier. We had a main team last season that went to the main playoffs, was one game away from being promoted to MDL.
Nice.
Um, but then some roster changes happened, and we ended up selling our main spot, and we're playing in intermediate now.
Hmm.
But because of how many teams there are, I just don't think our CS team has as much recognition as our Overwatch team because I think our Overwatch team performs more often and better. So I
Yeah. I
think
mean,
that's kind of
you
like,
guys are usually within the top 8 to top 4 for most of the tournaments that you're in for Overwatch, right? So, I mean, there's a fair bit of brand recognition at that point.
yeah, I mean, Overwatch is kind of a weird community, right? Because outside of Overwatch League, there's really not much going on. So,
Hmm.
I mean, we've been at the top of the scene, like the amateur scene, for like the last few months,
Hmm.
um, and we've played in pretty much every tournament and placed well and won a handful of tournaments. So, I'd say our Overwatch team's doing pretty well. Yeah.
Yeah, I think that's a big part of why I wanted to interview you specifically to try to get like a bigger picture of kind of how well the tier 2 slash tier 3 scene is doing. And
Okay.
like I think the Savage is kind of a good, or you specifically will have a good insight into like what's going on there. So just like briefly, when did you start? You started the team in March, right? But when did you start this core that you're working with for Overwatch?
Yeah. So, I think you know how it is with teams where
Hmm.
we've had three main iterations, like core iterations of our Overwatch team since March. And like we slowly moved up in the ranks. When I founded it, we were like literally like a diamond team. Okay.
Hmm.
And you make changes over time and you move up in the world. This core that we had of Derek, Capo, and Ace, we started with this core back in September. It's like
Hmm.
early September, and we've had to make a few roster changes here and there, as everybody does. But we've been together since September, so that's about 4 months now. Yeah.
Yep. I mean, that puts you. I guess you guys would have been in Open Division season 2 and 3, and then now 4, right? With this
Well, yeah.
core.
So this core started late in season two. And
Okay.
okay, we played season one, our old roster,
Uh huh.
but most of those players retired. And in season one, we went to the playoffs. We lost to Boys Night Out, I think.
Okay.
And then season two, we were actually boycotting it because we thought Open didn't really make any sense, and so we didn't play the first week.
Mm-hmm.
And then we made roster changes, and then we ended up going to the playoffs
Yeah.
after that. And the only loss that we had that season was the game that we didn't play in week
Mm-hmm.
one. And then obviously we won Open Division season 3, and now Open Division has changed, so things are a little bit different now. But I
Just
mean,
a
we've
little
been there
bit.
since the beginning.
Yeah. So I mean, right now you guys are undefeated, right? I think it's 6-0.
Yeah,
Uh-huh.
we are 6-0. We have a pretty tough match coming up this weekend,
Mm-hmm.
but yeah, we are.
I think there were like 12 or 13 teams that were 6-0, right? If I'm correct.
Yeah, there's 13 teams that are 6-0, and somebody sent me like a spreadsheet of all of the 6-0 teams and like their map counts,
Yeah.
and uh it's only us and sleeper picks that they haven't dropped a map yet. So
Oh wow.
yeah, and
Okay.
we face them on Saturday, so that'll be like a really good matchup. We're very excited to play them actually.
That would be really fun to watch. So good luck on that one.
Yeah, if only
Um,
they streamed it.
if only that might. I mean, maybe they'll come up with that idea. Who knows?
Maybe.
Um, but I guess that kind of leads into generally where the top tier of open divisions at, right? Because one of the big things here is that now open division has entry into contenders, right? You have
Right.
the possibility of doing well in open and then moving up your team into contenders to play against some academy teams. And there's about 4 slots, right, from open division. The top 4 teams get to do that. And then for the tier 3 categorization, that's the top 16 teams, right? So at what point are the teams here like looking like they're competing against academy teams? Um, how likely is it for the teams at the open division to really be able to get into those slots for contenders?
Uh we I actually have a lot of insight on that, and I'm gonna try not to spoil anything. I'm gonna try not to ruin anyone's, I don't want to leak anything.
Uh huh.
I think this first season of this whole Path to Pro that Blizzard's doing is very hectic at our level, sort of at like the top of tier 3, tier 2, teams that have been around a while.
Mm-hmm.
Um, the answer to your question is pretty open because the truth is that a lot of the teams that are playing in Open now, a lot of the undefeated teams in Open today, are actually probably more fit for contenders than you might realize.
Mm-hmm.
And it's a particularly interesting season because they announced that 7 Overwatch League academy teams are going to field teams in North America. We know hypothetically that 4 teams will be returning from last season.
Mm-hmm.
So that leaves 11 teams that have guaranteed spots in this next season of contenders. So they announced this whole Path to Pro, and it's pretty simple math. If there's 12 teams in contenders, and 11 of them are already guaranteed slots, then you're really only fighting for one spot. And it kind of sucks when you're in Open and you have to fight for one spot ultimately.
Right.
And it's unique to this season, this sort of inaugural season, right? Because once everybody's in contenders, once all the academy teams are picked and a season goes by and relegation starts, I think it'll be more normal. You'll have 4 teams actually fighting to win Open, but right now it's just a little bit different. It's a
So
little
do you
bit.
think it's
It's a bit of a tighter squeeze this season.
do you think it's just because they had to start somewhere, so they had to allow a lot of the new teams in with I guess guaranteed spots for contenders, and they couldn't use the option of relegation yet to really make more teams slots open for contenders team or for open division teams?
Yeah, I mean, the truth is, as stressful as it is for teams like ours,
Hmm.
it's really the only way they could have done it.
Right.
Like if you've got to fill all these spots, and you want to make sure that your Overwatch League teams have the opportunity to field contenders teams.
Hmm.
I mean, there's really no better place to do it. Our region got hit a little harder, and we're a little bit more restricted than other regions because 7 Overwatch League orgs opted to field teams here as opposed to another region.
Hmm.
You know, some regions like South America, if you basically make it to the playoffs and open, you have a contender spot because that's
Right.
how
Right.
not saturated they are there. So it's a little bit unlucky, but there's really no other way to do it. And it really comes down to what do the Overwatch League owners want to do.
Hmm.
And it turns out that most of them just wanted to field teams here, and it kind of closed the door for existing teams in a way.
Of course. And I mean, there's more NA Overwatch League teams here as well. So, I mean,
Yeah.
you're not going to see the same thing in Europe when there is one European Overwatch League team.
Yeah, it's also a lot easier too if you're even for a team like NYXL, right?
Hmm.
That team's all Korean, okay, but they've decided to field a North American team, and you got to realize that even if they're probably going to pick up Korean players, like the best talent in the world,
Hmm.
it's probably easier for you as an organization to have them here in the same country that you are here in. You know what I
Hmm.
mean? So that's why NA is such a juicy, academy. Uh, has such a juicy amount of academy teams is because they all want to be able to live with their papa team.
Of course. So I guess one of the big things here is also that they're using 12 slots as opposed to like 16 like you typically see in Apex. Usually those are 16 slots, and then you additionally have the um, Apex Challengers scene, and then teams will rise through Challengers, sort of like how Open Division works, and then you get brought up into the main scene. Of course, Apex is now done, but I thought it was very interesting that they went with 12 slots as opposed to 16, and they easily could have done that. But I guess, do you have any thoughts on that?
Actually, I never really thought about the significance of the number of
Uh huh.
teams because you are right. That is what Apex was like, and I know at first when they announced that there would be 12 teams, like when they came out with that video, I was worried because I thought it would only be like Overwatch League because there's 12 Overwatch League teams. I was
Right.
worried that they were all just going to have one contender spot and nobody was going to actually be able to make contenders.
Uh huh.
But after I found out that that was not the case. I mean, I don't know. I never really thought about the significance. I don't know if there is significance. Maybe it was just random. They
It
just
could
chose
have been.
12.
And I think if it's just random at that point, then they easily could add more slots later, just like they're gonna add Overwatch teams at some point.
Yeah, they could. If there's like an overwhelming amount of teams and talented teams, they could. I don't
Hmm.
see why not. But if they increase it to say 20 or 16 in
Right.
North America, they would have to do it for the other regions as well. And I don't think that some regions are going to have that much good talent, right? So
Right. And I guess the other
I think
question would be, do you think there is enough talent here to maybe field 16 good teams for contenders, 20 good teams, 30 good teams?
I don't know about 30. 30 is a big number. I think I could tell you right now that the contenders teams that you're going to see, like the 12 contenders teams coming up this season, will be very, very talented.
Hmm.
And I think you could probably have 16 very talented teams, maybe 20 or something. I mean, it really depends on how much talent you bring from other regions.
Hmm.
But there's talent here. There's a lot of talent that hasn't been looked at, people that maybe just don't have big names or big experience that are very talented. There's tons of talent here. There's talent everywhere
Hmm.
for sure.
Yeah, I mean, you guys were just looking through new support players, if I'm not wrong, and going through a big tryout process with picking out good supports to fill out the rest of your roster as well, right?
Yeah, we just picked up 2 new players,
Hmm.
and that was a pretty long process. But it wasn't just our team; it was pretty much every team in the scene has been trialing players because of the
Hmm.
contenders news. So
Has a lot of that been players are just trying to drop out of their current rosters to try out for contenders teams, or are they just getting picked up by either contenders or academy teams, and then they're just like leaving.
It's a combination of both.
Okay.
It's a combination of both. I think for the most part, it's players just trying to get tryouts for contenders teams.
Mm-hmm.
Uh, like when it was announced that there was going to be 7 academy teams, every good player in the region was just posting ads looking for contenders team, and everybody's scrambling, trying to figure out how they can get onto an academy team.
Mm-hmm.
And the reason for that is not just because players want a free ride to contenders, because there's players from established teams who are probably contenders level
Mm-hmm.
who would still love to have an academy spot. And the reason for that is that the academy spots are going to pay.
Of course.
So if you're on a team that's unpaid and you get the chance to play an academy team, of course you'd want to do that. So
Mm-hmm.
it's a combination of things, but I think it's mostly the players looking
Mm-hmm.
for an opportunity, you know?
Right, because I did see that Kongarna, if I'm not wrong, had a lot of players drop out just looking for slots, and I think Crimzo and a couple others are still looking as well, and are publicly looking as well.
Well, the thing about this wasn't just a Kongarna thing either. This was actually a really common thing. Is you could be on an established team that you get along with your teammates very well, but you know, as long as you have like a mutual understanding with your teammates that, hey, I'm going to post a recruitment ad and I'm only looking for academy options because I want to get paid.
Mm-hmm.
Then, you know, as long as you have that mutual understanding with your team, it's not so much that they're trying to like leave Kongarna or they're trying to leave their teams. It's just that they're just kind of fishing for an opportunity, you know, and
Right.
it was pretty much everybody's team had players doing that, you know.
So, do you think that the academy scene, in addition to contenders, so I mean, I'm assuming that most of the academy teams are not only going to be paying their players based off of what they get from the contenders, so from Blizzard, but then they're also going to probably pay them additional money via salary or something like that. Do you think that that's bringing more stability to the scene overall, or do you think that that's making things more tumultuous or anything like that?
I think it's great. I think you're right. I can tell you from what I understand that academy teams are going to have a base salary, much like Overwatch League teams have.
Mm-hmm.
It's not going to be as much, right? Like
Mm-hmm.
it's not like everybody's going to get paid like they're pros, but everybody that's on an academy team will have, you know, decent money from what I understand.
Right.
So I think it's great for the scene. I also think the most interesting part about that is that these academy teams that are shelling out money for players are also able to get relegated. So
Right.
even if you're paying your players, like let's say you pay a bunch of Koreans or the entire roster of Lunatic High to play for you in NA, if you lose, you're out and you wasted your money.
Right.
And I think that's very interesting. And I could see how it makes it harder for some teams in the scene, and in that way maybe is a detriment to the scene.
Mm-hmm.
But overall, I think it just helps legitimize the scene more and make the scene more professional. So it's definitely a good thing in my book.
So I guess, do you think that relegation is a good thing in the scene? Because we were talking earlier about how it's important for teams to be able to go through open and get into these slots for contenders, like get recognition, be able to start the path to pro, and get not a ton of money, but at least some that they can live off of that. But at the same time, if there are organizations that are investing money, is it good for them in a long-term investment standpoint to have the potential to be relegated? Is that going to like diminish salaries or increase risk or anything like that?
It definitely increases risk for the orgs that are paying a lot of money.
Mm-hmm.
But I think that it's extremely important, like for the scene as a whole. Like if you don't have the majority of contender spots allowed to be relegated just because they're paying money, then you really destroy the whole purpose of following the path to pro.
Mm-hmm.
Like if I'm on an open team, which I manage an open team, and I find out that no matter what we do every single season, there's only going to be one spot up for grabs.
Right.
Even if we're better than a team that's in the contenders league, then I would hate the scene. I would hate that. That's a terrible way to kind of form the scene.
So
So
do you
I think
that
it's great because it encourages competition, and it leaves the door open. Like if you truly are good, you can still compete and you can beat these teams and knock them out. I think it's good from that perspective. And I also think that as far as worrying about investment, these larger organizations, they're mainly only using these academy rosters to farm players and
Hmm.
to hold on to players that they want to bring into OWL later. So it is a big money investment, but so is having an Overwatch League spot.
Of
I
course.
think that it's worthwhile for them to have that extra development cushion to bring in players into contenders. And the only thing that I'm a little bit confused about is if you get relegated, like let's say Boston's academy team gets relegated,
Hmm.
like they go, they get 0 wins next season at contenders or whatever. What are they going to do? Because I
Right.
wouldn't think that they would continue to run that team
Hmm.
and hope to win open. They would.
Yeah.
I feel like if I was an academy spot, I would just cut all my players and buy a spot from somebody who made it to contenders. I don't know. That's the
Yeah.
most interesting part, I think.
That's an interesting point. I didn't think about that. But to me, it definitely seems like it, as a system, favors talent more than it favors like investment or orgs, which I think is a good sign to see from Blizzard. Because I think there's a lot of concern from either players or just the community as a whole of where Blizzard really wants to focus with the path to pro as a whole. And it seems to me like it's a lot more focused on individual talent, trying to either make it into academy teams or make it in through open teams to Overwatch League. They're more concerned with good players forming, getting a base, and then eventually being brought up into the pro scene, rather than either teams having more branding or more exposure through their academy teams or something like that.
Yeah, I think you're right.
So I think the other thing is that, do you think that currently through the open division process that we see that talent developing, or do you think that a lot of the talent is more just being resurfaced or is just shown through the open division scene right now before it's getting picked up through academy teams or through contenders teams?
I think that, like I said before, this season is a little bit more hectic than what it will be in the future,
Mm-hmm.
because for the most part, academy teams, I can tell you that for the most part, academy teams are totally done recruiting.
Mm-hmm.
Contenders roster contract deadline is next Friday, and I know that most of the teams are completely done recruiting, so they're not really looking at open to pick up a good open team or anything like that. That's all been done and handled. And I think this season, what we're seeing with contenders teams is going to be a lot of top tier talent and like ex tier 1 talent that
Mm-hmm.
already have made names for themselves, who maybe just didn't make it to Overwatch League because of lack of spots, are
Right.
kind of getting their opportunity to play in contenders for basically just less money or whatever. So this season, you're going to get a lot more existing talent that we're familiar with. And in the future, we'll be able to see, I think, a lot more young talent that you're not familiar with, or young teams that you're not familiar with. But right now, I don't think a lot of that come up is really present.
Right. So I guess another question that I had is that a lot of the academy teams seem to be keeping a lot of their recruitment outside of the public view. It was a lot of like coaches from these teams personally messaging individual players they already knew they wanted, or trying to like individually get into contact with these players for recruitment. Was there any sort of reason behind this? Do you think that this was good for the scene?
I don't know whether or not it's good or bad.
Mm-hmm.
I think it if you look at the way Overwatch League was formed, a lot of the teams are basically just boys clubs. They're
Mm-hmm.
they're friends who played together or ex teams that play together that got picked up. Quid pro quo basically. And contenders, a lot of it's the same. You see a lot of people that know each other already that got picked up. So there wasn't really a lot of reason for academy teams to post like recruitment ads.
Right.
You also have to keep in mind that academy teams have like coaching staff, and
Right.
academy teams have literally Overwatch League coaching staffs. So they have recruiters that know the players who didn't get picked up in Overwatch League.
Hmm.
And, they're familiar with the scene. Like these people know what they're doing. So for Academy, at least, a lot of it was already pre-decided. Um, a lot of I there's not really any teams that of that, like there's not really any existing teams that just got picked up straight up. For the most part, they just knew like the players they wanted, and they brought in a bunch of players to trial, and they did it privately,
Right.
because they didn't want to include anybody that they didn't know. Basically, I think that's what happened mostly.
So I guess, did you think that that plays into part of why we're not going to see a lot of new and upcoming talent, and it's a lot of like these owl recruiters or owl tier coaches already have their list of players that either did well in their tryouts before but didn't quite make it, or understood by just looking at player stats or anything like that, kind of what they wanted before they even started looking. So they already kind of knew where to go for what they wanted for their team.
Yeah, I think for the most part that's the case.
Hmm.
And we're really only talking about the academy teams. We've also got
Right.
like the returning spots, then the non-academy spots. But for the academy spots, it was pretty much all decided already.
Hmm.
I know, like for instance, NYXL. I don't know who their team is straight up. They're one of the only teams I have no idea who they are. But I remember seeing like a video when this is before Overwatch League even started,
Hmm.
and somebody on NYXL was being interviewed, and he got like a text, and he was smiling, and somebody asked him like, "Oh, what was that?" And he said, and this was even 2 months ago, he said that they already knew who their contenders team was.
Oh
Right, so
wow.
they had
Okay.
already pre-decided, like, yeah, we're going to fill the contenders team, and we know who they are.
Yeah.
Probably a team that they were friends with.
Uh huh.
I'm assuming for them it would be a Korean team, probably. And so it just goes to show, I mean, even just from that, I think a lot of it was pre-decided from either players that have tried out or players that, these teams knew throughout the years or throughout the last couple of years.
Hmm.
It's pretty much all decided.
Yeah, that's very interesting, I think. But I think that it plays a lot into the fact that Overwatch as a scene has kind of been developing, and this isn't necessarily something that's, I don't know, brand new. Like a lot of these players have been developing history and gaining experience for a long time. So it seems like it's something that is more being exposed as opposed to players being groomed for this spot per se.
Yeah, I suppose so.
Yeah.
I think you'd be surprised by a lot of the contenders rosters. It's a good mix. I think it's a good mix, and I think the teams that we're gonna see this first season of contenders anyway are very very good teams.
Hmm.
And it's you also have to keep in mind that if there's very good teams and contenders, maybe it'll be very easy for Overwatch League to expand into more regions. So that's another thing that they're, I think, trying to do,
Hmm.
is build like super teams to ultimately maybe become, a new city team or something.
Right, or they can just bring up a couple of their players to their main roster if they need a specific role or anything like that as well.
Oh yeah, yeah, that's the thing too. Is with I don't want to get like too into it, right? But
Of course.
with the contract rules, it's optimal for you as an Overwatch League team to have a player that you want on your contenders team, because then you wouldn't have to buy out his contract because you already technically own his contract,
Hmm.
right? Because if you're trying to get a player from another contenders team, you have to buy out their contract.
Right.
So a lot of it is that, and that's what I meant by it's sort of like these contenders academy teams are basically just farm teams.
Hmm. So I think that there's Rogue, FaZe, and Envision are the three main teams that are reforming. I think Renegades and Kangarna are invited to the um I can't remember what it's called, the tournament that you play in to figure out if you're in the contender slots or you get a contender slot. Um, but for these endemic teams, I'm assuming that they're either rebuilding their rosters or adding new players. What are their chances against these academy teams? It seems like the academy teams have a lot of resources, just financially speaking. and a lot of insight into how either owl teams work or anything like that. So not necessarily looking at like the players per se, but it seems like they're on a different footing compared to the academy teams, just from a either management or organization standpoint.
Yeah, I can see that being an issue for returning teams.
Hmm.
Like I said before, like it, it's gonna be weird. It's gonna be real weird. Like everything that everybody thinks they know is gonna be totally moot because there's some weird stuff going on with these contenders teams right now, and I guess we'll find out more by like next week when
Okay.
the deadline is. But like there's some weird stuff. So contenders trials is going to be 8 teams, and there were 2 teams that have invited, and that's Congarna and Renegades.
Hmm.
Congarna obviously has their roster. They just did a second announcement for their new roster, and they'll be there. I know for sure.
Hmm.
And then Renegades, I haven't been able to get any information about Renegades. I don't think that they're showing up. I don't think they have a roster at all.
Hmm.
Um, the same goes for there. So there's 4 returning teams: FNR, GFE,
Hmm.
Envision, Phase, and my brain's not working.
Um,
Rogue.
Rogue,
Okay.
yeah.
So I know that for the most part, those I know Envision will be returning, but I don't know about the other 3 spots if they are returning at all.
Hmm.
So that leaves basically 4 teams. If you have those 3 teams plus Renegades, 4 teams that really haven't announced a roster yet, and I don't think are going to have rosters
Hmm.
necessarily. But they also have the right to sell their spot,
To the
so they can
tournament.
give their spot to whoever they want, basically.
Uh,
So
Is that just that's just to the tournament, right? That's not anything else, right?
what do you mean?
Oh, you're talking. I'm confusing stuff. Can Gangarna or Renegades sell their spot to the tournament?
Well, if so, they have until like a certain date to accept, which I believe is probably next Friday. I think it's the deadline. The
Oh, okay, okay.
So if they don't accept, then if they don't accept or they don't have somebody to replace them, and the same goes for contenders.
Hmm.
Basically, it would just open up a spot uh, for the league below to come in. So like if
Okay.
it's like right now, if Renegades and Congarna both show up for contenders trials, then that leaves 6 teams that have to be brought up from open division to go to trials.
Right.
Okay. Um, if Renegades decides not to show up or they don't sell their spot or whatever, then it'd bring 7 teams up. So
Hmm.
it would open up a spot for an open team. And then, same goes for the contenders teams. Like if a contenders team doesn't fill its spot or fill its roster, then instead of there being 1 spot for
Then
people
there's
to get
two.
promoted to contenders, there would be
Two.
more. So
Okay, that makes sense.
yeah, so we really like a lot of info will start coming out next weekend, I think, and we'll have a better idea of the actual number. But we know we have at least 1 spot for contenders open.
Hmm.
Could be 2, could be 3, whatever comes out.
Yeah, it definitely seems like there's going to be a lot of, I guess, confusion that's going to get cleared up in the next couple of weeks, which should be good. And that seems like there's a lot of teams that are trying to make decisions for how they want to move forward based off of that information. Do you think that's correct? Or do you think that most of the teams at that level kind of already know what's going on?
Yeah, most of the teams at that level kind of know
Yeah,
what's going on with the other teams. But you can't really do anything until contracts are signed. So
of course. Yeah.
we all kind of have an idea of who's going to show up. We all kind of have an idea of like who's on what team. Because these are teams that like our team scrims. So like
Right.
we're all a little bit familiar with each other. Um, it just you can't really say much until contracts are signed. But it should everything should start coming out within the next week or 2. By the time that open is over, I think the landscape in open is going to change a lot, and that's why they had to leave the roster deadline for open division open. Because if a player, let's say like a player is on an open team
Hmm.
and they get signed to contenders team next week, the team that they were on an open needs to be able to recruit and fill that spot if they want to keep on keeping on.
Of
So
course.
we'll start finding out more, I think, next week on that.
It's good to hear. Well, I think that's all that I personally had for you as far as questions go. Do you have any final thoughts? How,
Did you see? As we're talking,
Hmm.
uh, Boston just beat London, so that was pretty
Oh
interesting.
wow.
Yeah,
That'll be good to
unlucky,
watch.
unlucky, I
Yeah.
guess.
Interesting. I'll have to go
No, I
watch
didn't have
that.
anything. I think I'm good. It was nice being able to talk about contenders a little bit. I'm sorry I can't give you any crazy info.
No, no, I don't want to get you in trouble, so thank you so much.
Yeah, man. Thanks for talking to me, dude.
Of course. Take care.